Welcome to Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the epic tale of the Argonauts, beginning with the chapter, Jason Does the Bidding of Aetes. In this manner they parted. Jason returned to the ship and his comrades, his spirits filled with joy. The girl went to join her handmaids, who hurried towards her, but she did not notice their solicitude, for her soul was soaring into the clouds. With light feet, she mounted the wagon, urged on the mules, who came homeward of themselves, and re-entered the palace. Chalciope, waiting for her long since, full of anxiety for her sons. She was sitting on a stool, with her head bowed. Her eyes were moist beneath her lowered lids, for she was thinking of the evil web in which she was entangled. Jason, meanwhile, told his friends how the girl had given him a wonderful magic ointment, and as he spoke he held it out to them. All rejoiced, except Aetes, who sat apart and ground his teeth in rage. The next morning they dispatched 2 men to King Aetes to fetch the dragon's teeth. They came from the same dragon Cadmus had slain at Thebes, and Aetes gave them quite confidently, for he believed Jason could not possibly survive the battle, and even if he succeeded in yoking the bulls. In the night which followed upon this day, Jason bathed and made an offering to Aetes, as Medea had bidden. The goddess herself heard his prayers and emerged from the depths of her cave. Her awful head twined with writhing and writhing vipers and fiery sprays of oak. At her heels ran the hounds of the underworld and barked around her. The field trembled beneath her steps, and the nymphs of the river, Phares, moaned in fear. Horror smote Jason as he prepared to return to the ship, but he obeyed his beloved and did not look back. And the shimmering dawn stained the snow-covered peaks of the Caucasus with rosy light. Then Aetes put on his circus, the one Ares had taken from the giant Mamos on the fields of Pelega. On his head he placed his 4-crested helmet of gold, and in his hand he took the shield covered with 4 layers of oxide, which none besides him could lift, save Heracles alone. His son held the swift horses harnessed to the chariot. He mounted it, took the rein, and flew through the city, followed by throngs of people. Even though he was only there as a mere spectator, he wished to be fully armored, as if he was himself going to battle. Jason, obedient to Medea's directions, had salved his lance, his shield, and his sword with the magic ointment. His companions formed a ring around him, and each tried his weapon on the lance. But it did not give. It did not bend. Not even the slightest. It was as stone in his steady hand. This vexed Aetes, the son of Aetes, and he aimed his blow at the shaft under the point. But his sword sprang back like a hammer that hits an anvil, and the youth exulted in the happy prospect of victory. Not until then did Jason anoint his body. Miraculous strength flowed through his limbs. The veins in his hands swelled with power, and he craved battle. As a warhorse neighs and paws to earth before the fray, and then lifts high its head and points its ears, so the son of Aeson, stretched in readiness to fight, tapped the ground with restless feet, and swung shield and lance in his hands. The heroes rode their leader to the field of Ares, where they found Aetes and the Colchians waiting for him. The king sat on the bank, and his people were scattered about the jutting ledges of the Caucasus. When the ship was made fast, Jason leaped ashore with his lance and shield, and immediately received a shining helmet full of pointed teeth. He strapped his sword to his shoulder and came forward, radiant as Ares or Apollo. Looking about the field, he soon discovered the yokes lying on the ground, and near them plow and plowshare, all of hammered iron. When he had studied these implements carefully, he fastened the iron point to the sturdy shaft of his lance and laid down the helmet. Then, covered by his shield, he went forward, searching for the tracks of the bulls. But these animals suddenly rushed at him from another side, coming from a subterranean cave where they were stabled. Both of them breathed fire, and thick clouds of smoke rolled about them. Jason's friends shook with fear at sight of these monsters, but he himself stood with his legs well apart, holding his shield before him, and awaited their onslaught like a rock pounded by the sea. And when they came at him, tossing their horns, their impact could not budge him from his position. As in a smithy when the bellows roar and the fires now leap in a shower of sparks, now hold their mighty breath, so the bulls roared and redoubled their thrust, spewing flame all the while, and the fitful glow played about the hero like lightning. But the magic kept him unharmed, and finally he took the bull in his right by the outer horn and tugged at him with all his might until he dragged him over to the iron yoke. Here he kicked the brazen feet and forced the beast to the earth with bent knees. In the same way, he subdued the other beasts, who was charging right at him. He flung aside his broad shield and through the flames licked about him, held down the kneeling bulls with both his hands. Aetes himself was forced to admire the stupendous strength of the man. Then, as they had agreed upon before, Castor and Polydeuces handed him the yokes, and he fastened them to the necks of the animals with sure and deft hands. Last, he picked up the iron shaft and fitted it to the ring of the yoke, and now the twin brothers lost no time in leaving that place, for they were not immune to fire like Jason. He took his shield again and threw it across his shoulder, so that it dangled over his back on the strap. Then he reached for the helmet with the dragon's teeth, gripped his lance, and using it as a goad, forced the angry bulls to pull the plow. Their strength and that of the mighty plowmen tore deep gashes in the earth, and the huge clods crashed in the furrows. Jason walked with a firm step and sowed and turned earth with the teeth, cautiously looking back to see if the harvest of dragon men was already up and having at him, and the bulls plodded on with their brazen hooves. When only 2/3 of the day had passed in the bright afternoon, the whole field was plowed, though it measured more than 4 acres, and now he unharnessed the bulls and threatened them with his weapons, so that they fled in fear. The hero himself returned to the ship, for the furrow still showed no sign of life. His comrades surrounded him with loud acclaim, but he said nothing, only filled his helmet with water from the river and quenched his burning thirst. Then he felt the joints of his legs and his heart filled with fresh joy of combat, even as a raging boar grinds his teeth in readiness for the huntsman. For all along the fields, the harvest was up. The entire grove of Ares bristled with shields and sharp lances, and glittered so brightly with the helmets that the gleam flashed up to the sky. Then Jason remembered the words of wily Medea. He picked up a great round stone. 4 strong men could not have lifted it from the ground, but he took it effortlessly in his hand and tossed it far among the warriors who had sprung up from the earth. Bold yet cautious, he crouched down on one knee and covered himself with his shield. The Colchians shouted aloud as a wave roared when they break on a jagged rock, and Aetes stared at that astonished throw of undisguised wonder. But the earthborn men fell upon one another like snarling dogs, and each killed the other with dull cries of rage. Stricken down by their spears, they fell to Mother Earth like pines or oaks uprooted by a whirlwind. When the flight was hottest, Jason rushed among them like a shooting star which falls through the dark sky at night and seems an omen sent by the gods. He unsheathed his sword, pierced now this one, then that one, struck down this one, and some who were already up mowed down the grass like others. Still, he cleft the heads of some, and he returned and joined in the battle. The furrows streamed with blood. Dead and wounded fell on all sides, and many sank into the earth almost as deep as they had been sown. Anger gnawed at the soul of King Aetes. Without a word, he left the shore and returned to the city, brooding only on how he could rid himself of Jason and inflict some grim hurt upon him to boot. These events had taken up the day. It was dusk. Jason rested from his labors, and around him his friends rejoiced. Medea takes the golden fleece. All night long, with the elders among his people, King Aetes held council in the palace, how the Argonauts might be outwitted, for he was well aware that all that had happened the past day could not have taken place without the help of his daughters. Hera, queen of the gods, saw the danger threatening Jason and filled Medea's heart with misgivings until she trembled like a deer in the depths of the forest at the bay of the hounds. Since at once divined that her father had guessed the truth, and she also feared that her handmaids might well know of the matter, tears burned under her lids, and there was a rushing in her ears. She let her hair hang disheveled, as though in mourning, and if fate had not willed otherwise, she would have taken poison and so put an end to her misery that very hour. Her hand already held the brimming cup, when Hera revived her courage and turned her purpose, so that she poured the poison back into the flask. She regained command of herself and resolved to flee, covered her couch and the doorpost with kisses, touched the walls of her room one last time, sheared a lock from her head, and put it on her bed for her mother to remember her by. "Farewell, dear mother," she said with a voice full of tears. "Farewell, Chalciope, and all the house. Oh, stranger, it would have been better had you drowned in the sea before coming to Colchis." And she left her cherished home as the captive flees the harsh prison where he has been enslaved. The palace gates flew open at her murmured spells. On bare feet she ran along narrow paths, drawing the veil over her cheeks with her left hand, while her right raised the hem of her garment to keep it from the ground. The watchman did not recognize her, and soon she passed beyond the confines of the city and was hastening to the temple by a little-known road, for in gathering roots and herbs for her potions and poisonous brews, she had come to know all the trails through the fields and woods. Selene, goddess of the moon, saw her and said smilingly to herself, as she shed her radiance upon the earth, "So others, too, are tormented by love, as I for my beautiful Endymiona. Often have you driven me from the sky with your magic. Now you yourself are suffering agonies for Jason. Well, go if you must, but do not think that your craftiness will avail to escape the bitter sorrows that are ahead." So said Selene to herself, but Medea went her way on swift feet. And now she turned towards the shore, where the great fire which the Argonauts had lit and tended all night in Jason's honor served to guide her. When she was opposite the ship, she called Phrontis, her sister's youngest son, and he, along with Jason, recognized her voice and replied 3 times to her triple call. The heroes who had heard and seen were astonished at first, but then they rowed to meet her. Before the ship was moored, Jason leaped ashore, and Phrontis and Argos followed her. "Save me," cried the girl, clasping their knees. "Save yourself and me from my father. All is betrayed, and there is no one to help. Let us flee on the ship before he can mount his swift horse. I will get you the golden fleece by putting the dragon to sleep. But you, O stranger, swear by your gods and in the presence of your friends that you will not disgrace me when I am alone and an alien in your land." She said this sadly, but Jason rejoiced in his heart. Gently, he raised her from her knees, embraced her, and said, "Beloved, let Zeus and Hera, the patron goddess of marriage, be my witness that I shall take you into my house as a rightful wife as soon as we are back to Greece." This he swore, and laid his hand in hers. Then Medea bade the heroes row to the sacred grove to take the golden fleece that very night. The ship flew on the arrowy speed. Jason and the girl left it before dawn and took the path across the meadow. In the grove they found the tall oak on which the golden fleece hung, shining through the night like a morning cloud suffused with the first beams of the sun. But facing it was the sleepless dragon, whose sharp eyes pierced the distance. He stretched his long neck toward the corners and hissed so fiercely that the margin of the river echoed the sound. As flames rolled through a burning wood, so the monster, with its glittering scales, wound his way, hop upon loop upon loop. But the girl went toward him boldly and made a sweet-voiced prayer to sleep, the most powerful of the gods, to lull the dragon to rest. And as she begged the great queen of the underworld to bless her doing, Jason followed her fearfully. But already the dragon was growing drowsy at the girl's magical sound. He lowered the arch of his back and stretched out the coils of his vast body. Only the horrid head was still upright and threatened to devour them both with its open jaws. But now, with a sprig of juniper, Medea sprinkled magic dew into his eyes while she conjured him with certain words. Drowsiness flowed over him at the fragrance of the liquid. He closed his jaws, spread his scaly length through the wood, and slept. At her word, Jason pulled the fleece from the oak while she kept sprinkling the dragon's head with her magic tincture. Then they hurried from the dense grove, and from afar Jason held up the broad ram's fleece, which shed a gleam over his forehead and his blonde hair, and lit up the dark path. He carried the shimmering treasure over his left shoulder, and it hung from his neck to his ankles. But then he rolled it up for fear that if man or god encountered him, he might rob him of this precious burden. At dawn, they boarded the vessel, and the Argonauts surrounded their leader and marveled at the fleece, which glittered like the lightning of Zeus. Each wanted to touch it with his hand, but Jason would not allow this and hid it under a cloak. He seated the girl in the stern of the ship and said to his friends, "Now, let us travel quickly to our native land. The girl's counsel has helped us accomplish what we undertook. In return, I shall take her into my house as my lawful wife, and you must help me protect her, for she is the rescuer of all Greece. Besides, I have no doubt that soon Aetes will come with his people and try to prevent us from leaving the river for the open sea. So let half of us row, while the other half hold our shields of oxhide toward the foe, and so cover our retreat. For our return to our own people and the honor or shame of Greece are in our hands." With these words, he cut the ropes that held the ship, armed himself, and took his place near the girl besides Aetes, helmsman. The swift oars smote the waves, and the ship glided down to the mouth of the river. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.